Okay, so picture this. A banquet. Renaissance Italy.
Hmm.
Jewels. Wine. Laughter. But then a hush falls over the crowd as this beautiful woman enters, captivating and chilling all at once. Lucrezia Borgia, a name that people whispered with fear and fascination, even centuries after her death.
Yeah, it's incredible.
We've got this episode of the Noble Blood podcast all about her.
Oh, fantastic.
We're going to try to separate fact from fiction, peel back all the layers of the myth to find the real woman.
The woman behind the legend.
Exactly.
It's really remarkable how her image has been just totally shaped over time. She's practically like the definition of a femme fatale, that seductive woman. Uses her charm, but for dangerous ends.
Right, right.
But was she really a manipulative poisoner like so many people believe? Or was she more of a pawn in a much bigger game? A product of her time and that just ruthless family she was born into?
Yeah, that's what we're going to explore today.
Awesome.
To really get Lucrezia, we need to step back in time. 15th century Italy.
Yeah.
Powerful families, vying for control.
All that political intrigue, alliances, backstabbing.
Hey, maybe.
A little poison.
Maybe. And the Borgia family really stands out. I mean, their ambition, ruthlessness.
Yeah.
They were originally from Spain, not Italy, so they were kind of outsiders in the Italian political scene.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that outsider status, it definitely fueled a lot of the rumors.
Yeah.
And prejudice against them.
So they were already fighting an uphill battle
Oh, for sure.
to be accepted.
Yeah.
And Lucrezia, the Pope's daughter, was right in the middle of it all.
Absolutely. She was a huge asset to her father, Pope Alexander VI.
Mm-hmm.
He used those strategic marriages to really solidify the family's power.
Right.
Can you imagine the pressure she must have felt as this, young woman caught between her own desires and the ambitions of her family?
The podcast mentions her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza.
Oh, right. Powerful Milanese family.
All about alliances.
Yeah.
But as often happens in politics, things change.
Oh, yeah.
And Giovanni became a liability. Exactly. And this is where it gets kind of dark. The podcast suggests that Cesare Borgia, her brother, infamous for his ruthlessness, basically told her, Giovanni's gotta go.
Wow. That's chilling. I mean, divorce wasn't really an option back then.
Right.
What happened?
They tried for an annulment,
Mm-hmm.
but the grounds, questionable. To get that marriage dissolved, they claimed it was never consummated.
Oh, wow.
Which seems pretty unlikely, because Giovanni had been married before, and his previous wife died in childbirth.
Right, right. So there were already whispers about Lucrezia, like somehow she was involved in this whole messy situation. But then on top of that, a mysterious baby, the Borgia baby.
Right. The podcast suggests that it was probably Pope Alexander VI's illegitimate child, but at the time all these crazy rumors were flying around, some even pointing at Lucrezia and Cesare, suggesting incest.
Wow.
It just added to the whole dark, scandalous reputation of the Borgias.
That's hard to imagine what it must have been like for Lucrezia.
I know.
All this drama, the intrigue, it feels like she was very much a pawn in her family's games.
Yeah, it seems that way. And her second marriage to Alfonso d'Aragona, the Duke of de Segli, it seemed like she might actually find some happiness.
Yeah.
He was closer to her age, and by all accounts, they seemed to really care for each other.
But even that didn't last. The podcast describes this attack on Alfonso, right on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica.
Oh, yeah, such a brazen attack. They ambushed him in broad daylight. He was badly wounded.
Wow.
He did recover initially, but then later he was strangled in his bed. Cesare Borgia is heavily implicated. Probably saw Alfonso as a political obstacle.
So, again, Lucrezia's a widow.
Yeah.
Under very suspicious circumstances. And you can imagine what this did to the rumors.
Oh, absolutely.
People were saying she was cursed. Dangerous, even.
It makes sense how those stories started to take hold. She was a young woman in a world completely dominated by men, especially in that Borgia family. Her father and brother were ruthless, ambitious. She was often just a tool to further their schemes.
The podcast mentions that during this time, she actually signed her letters as La Infelicissima, the most unhappy one.
Wow.
You can almost feel her heartbreak, her despair in those words.
It really is heartbreaking. But we have to think about the context here. We already talked about how the Borgias were outsiders.
Right.
Seen as a threat by a lot of the Italian powers. Easy targets for slander. Manipulation.
So you're saying their enemies might have used these rumors and gossip
Yeah.
as, like, a weapon. almost a propaganda campaign.
Exactly. It's practically impossible to know what's fact and what's fiction, especially with Lucrezia.
Right.
I mean, they were ruthless, no
Yeah.
doubt, in their ambition. But when you look for evidence actually linking Lucrezia to any crimes,
Yeah.
it's surprisingly thin.
Like that whole thing about the poison ring.
Oh, yeah.
I remember learning about that in history.
Fantastic.
She'd slip poison into her enemies' drinks with that secret compartment in her ring.
Right.
Come on.
Great story. But the Noble Blood episode actually points out there's no historical evidence to support it.
Oh, right.
Just another one of those rumors, you know?
Right.
Made to demonize the Borgias.
It makes you realize how much our perception of these historical figures is shaped by, like, whatever stories survive.
Oh, yeah.
Who gets to tell the story?
Absolutely.
It's like a reminder to always dig deeper,
For sure.
question these narratives,
Yeah.
especially about women in history.
Absolutely. And Lucrezia is like the perfect example. She was a woman of her time.
Mm-hmm.
A time when women, noble women especially, they were expected to be subservient to the men.
Right.
Their lives were dictated by their families. Marry well, produce heirs. That was the main thing.
And in the case of the Borgias, those needs were, well, extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But even with all that, Lucrezia managed to create a space for herself,
Yeah.
especially later on.
Yeah.
That's when she married Alfonso d'Este.
Right. The Duke of Ferrara.
Exactly.
That was a big turning point for her. It got her away from Rome,
Yeah.
away from the family's influence.
Yeah. Out of their shadow.
Exactly.
It's interesting. The podcast mentions that the Duke of Ferrara, he was hesitant at first to marry her.
Really?
He even sent ambassadors to Rome to assess her character.
Wow.
Make sure she wasn't some kind of, black widow.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
And what's interesting is these ambassadors came back with positive reports, described her as intelligent, charming, skilled in diplomacy.
Huh.
Seems like her reputation in Rome didn't match the reality.
Interesting. So was she putting on an act in Rome? Or did she really blossom once she was free of her family's control?
It's tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
But as the Duchess of Ferrara, she thrived. The podcast talks about how she was this huge patron of the arts, supporting writers, poets, musicians, known for her taste and her ability to, cultivate this vibrant scene at her court.
It's like she was trying to build a new identity for herself.
Yeah.
Distancing herself from those scandals.
Right. All that darkness
Yeah.
flung to the Borgia name.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just the arts either. The podcast also says she was known for her piety,
yeah.
her charitable works. Quite a contrast.
I know, from the scheming, poisonous woman, huh?
Exactly. And it's not just like her actions in Ferrara that challenge that old narrative. The podcast mentions her love letters,
Oh, yeah.
describes them as some of the most beautiful and passionate
Wow.
ever written.
So they give us a glimpse into her personal life, her desires, her vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Just humanizes her. You see a woman who is capable of deep love,
Right.
affection. Doesn't sound like a cold-hearted manipulator, does she?
No, not at all. It seems like as the years went on and she gained more independence,
Yeah.
she was able to really assert herself, had children,
Yeah.
managed her own court, built this whole reputation
Yeah.
for being refined. A diplomat.
It makes you wonder, was this capable, intelligent woman always there, just waiting for her chance to step out from behind her family? Or did those experiences in Rome, those years of turmoil, actually shape her into the leader she became in Ferrara?
It's a real chicken or the egg situation. But no matter the answer, Lucrezia Borgia was a complex person, a woman who defied easy labels. She was both a product of her time and someone who, in her own way, transcended the limitations that were placed on her. It really makes you think how history remembers people,
Oh,
especially women.
it's true.
It's so easy to just focus on the gossip,
Yeah.
the scandals, and miss the nuances, the whole picture of their lives.
Right. And what's interesting is, while Lucrezia is the one everyone remembers as the villain, the Noble Blood episode points out that her brother, Cesare Borgia, well, his legacy,
Yeah.
he actually inspired Machiavelli's The Prince,
Wow.
one of the most influential works on political philosophy ever.
So Caesar embodies that, like
Yeah.
ruthless, power-hungry side of the Borgias. And Lucrezia is painted as this femme fatale, even though you could argue her actions weren't nearly as Machiavellian as his.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how gender really influences how history remembers people. I mean, just think about it. Would a man in Lucrezia's exact position, navigating that treacherous world of Renaissance politics, would he have been judged as harshly?
It's a good question. And ironically, Caesar had a Pretty gruesome end.
Oh, yeah.
The podcast mentions he was killed in battle, stripped of everything, left with only a red roof tile to cover his own. Well, you get the picture. Not a glorious exit. For a man who wanted power and glory so much.
It almost feels like poetic justice, doesn't it? He lived by the sword, died by the sword.
Yeah.
And when he died and then Pope Alexander died, that was basically the end for the Borgia dynasty.
What about Lucrezia? Did she have a similar ending?
No, thankfully not. She actually outlived her father and her brother, even her oldest son, Rodrigo.
Oh, wow.
That must have been incredibly difficult.
So much loss, hardship. But she kept going. The podcast suggests that her later years in Ferrara were pretty peaceful. Such a contrast to all that turmoil of her youth in Rome.
Yeah, she continued to rule Ferrara, had more children, focused on supporting the arts, and charity. It seems like she actually found some peace, fulfillment in those years.
Which makes her death even more tragic.
Yeah.
The podcast says she died in childbirth, giving birth to what might have been her 9th child.
Wow.
Just a reminder, the dangers for women back then, even with wealth and power.
Yeah, it is a reminder that even in those positions, women's lives were so often defined by being wives and mothers. But the fact that centuries later, we're still talking about Lucrezia Borgia,
Right.
debating her character, trying to understand what motivated her, that says a lot.
She was more than just a pawn in her family's games, more than a symbol of villainy.
Right.
A complex woman, intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
who managed to survive in a very treacherous world. And she left a mark on history.
Definitely. Her story makes us question our assumptions, look beyond simple labels, and remember that history is rarely black and white. It's full of gray areas. And Lucrezia Borgia, with all her contradictions, embodies that perfectly.
So, to everyone listening, Lucrezia's story reminds us that the past is never simple. Be critical thinkers. Question the stories you're told. Remember that even the most infamous figures were human beings with their own desires, fears, complexities. Go deeper. Explore the sources. Form your own conclusions about this fascinating woman and what she means in history.